Whenever this committee convenes, we acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional Aboriginal people of the land on which we gather. We acknowledge all their descendants. We also acknowledge many Aboriginal people from other regions, as well as Torres Strait Islander and South Sea Islander people who now live in the local area and have made an important contribution to our community. Welcome, everyone. It's great having all committee members here, but also Councillor Hamill, Acting Mayor. Thank you for coming today. Councillor Fowler and Councillor Gates have joined us as visitors as well. Can I ask for someone to move that the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Thank you, Councillor Martin. Seconded, Councillor Martin. All those in favour of moving those minutes? That motion is carried. Great. Awesome. We have a number of starter items. One is the forward... Oh, actually, is there any conflict of interest declarations today? No? It's great. Awesome. We have a number of start items. One is the overview of the hazard reduction burn program and then the forward planning schedule. But I would like to unstar that hazard reduction burn program. I think there's some current public interest in that one, so it would be great to ask a few questions and get a bit of a presentation about that one. I think that's everything. So can I get a mover for the forward planning schedule, please? Councillor Castro, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour of the forward planning schedule? That motion is carried. Awesome. Awesome. All right, well, let's kick off with our first presentation. Before we start, Rod is stepping in for Jody. Rod Netterfield is stepping in for Jody right now. He's pretty rarely up here, but great to have you with us. You're up.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to present to you on volunteering in the city. Councillors, many parts of the city are involved in working with volunteers and volunteer-led organisations. Today's presentation focuses primarily, but not exclusively, on the work undertaken within Service Gold Coast and the Communities branch. The definition of volunteering that we use in the city is time willingly given for the common good without financial gain. Volunteers are the heart of our community and a key ingredient in our safe, active and healthy community. Volunteers support all aspects of our community, whether it's doing some beach patrols on the weekends, bringing the bin back in for an elderly neighbour, tree planting, driving a senior to their medical appointment, welcoming people across the road here at Hodder with a big friendly smile, helping out at a multicultural festival, supporting a response to recovery during a disaster, coaching the local sporting team. Volunteering can be both informal and formal, and it can be a regular or a one-off commitment. Volunteering benefits society at all levels. For individuals, it promotes individual well-being and inclusion through offering a sense of purpose and opportunities for social connection. For our communities, volunteering promotes broader community well-being through building social capital, networks and relationships between our people and connection to place. And broadly, for the nation, volunteering contributes to progress on many of the national priorities as well, including tackling mental health or indeed addressing elements of climate change. The statistics for volunteering speak for themselves. The Queensland Council of Social Services estimates that there are over 400,000 volunteers across Queensland at any given time, and that for every dollar invested in volunteering, there's a return on investment of $4.70 to community. It would cost $31.3 billion to replace the work undertaken by volunteers with paid labour. Therefore, using our return on investment calculation, the value of volunteering to Queensland is around $118 billion annually. In 2024, across Queensland, 52% of volunteers are volunteering out in their local community, with around 28% volunteering online or at home. The reported top 3 volunteering motivations cited by those who do volunteer is primarily the desire to help others, for their own enjoyment, and also staying active. 11% of Gold Coast residents volunteer, which is slightly lower than the Queensland and Australian average of 14%. And in the Gold Coast, 40 to 44-year-olds are actually our highest age group volunteering, with around 13% of that cohort volunteering actively in the city. Volunteering levels on the Gold Coast are lowest for our 25 to 34-year-old bracket and those over 85. Despite those positive statistics, volunteering is declining both locally and nationally. According to Volunteering Queensland in their 2024 State of Volunteering report, between 2020 and 2023, volunteers in Queensland decreased by around 20%, and informal volunteers reducing by around 15%. Nationally, 83% of volunteering organisations are reporting needing more volunteers to maintain their service. The top challenges in volunteering, for volunteering groups, I should say, are volunteer retention, recruitment, and ensuring the health and safety of their volunteers. Top barriers to volunteering are time, health, burnout, and the cost of living crisis. To use an example for that, traditionally you may have had retired grandparents volunteering. Now with the cost of living, those individuals may well be providing care for grandchildren as opposed to having free time to volunteer. Recognising its importance, the Queensland Government has established a parliamentary inquiry into volunteering with the mandate to identify a way to providing more support for Queenslanders that want to volunteer and removing any barriers and creating pathways for volunteering. The City has made a submission to that inquiry and looks forward to receiving the findings around September of this year. The Gold Coast volunteering ecosystem is broad, with multiple agencies from state and federal government through to peak bodies and other key stakeholders. Volunteering Australia is the national peak for volunteering, working to advance volunteering through policy, advocacy and research, leadership and sector development, stakeholder engagement and, of course, communication. Volunteering Australia is funded by the Australian Federal Government through Department of Social Services and has launched the National Strategy for Volunteering in 2023. Volunteering Queensland is a state peak body and the lead voice for advancing and promoting volunteering in Queensland. VQ is a membership-based organisation and provides support in recruiting and managing volunteers to approximately 300 organisations. VQ relies on both state and federal funding. And more locally, we have Volunteering Gold Coast, which is our local volunteering resource centre, which provides a matching service between organisations, organisational members and future volunteers. Volunteering Queensland also are a membership-based organisation and relies on volunteers to deliver their programs, as well as receiving some financial support through the state and through other mechanisms of funding. The City's approach is very much one of building capacity across the sector, through initiatives like the Volunteering Collective Forum, which is a platform for networking for volunteering organisations, which provides information sharing and access to guest speakers. Around 86% of participants at our volunteering collective last year reported that they intend to make changes in their organisation after attending one of our city forums. And for the eagle-eyed members of committee, you will see our Councillor Marshall emceeing last October's volunteering collective meeting up in the top right of that picture on the screen. The Gold Coast Volunteering Action Group is also part of the City's approach. Established in late 2023, it's a community-driven group supported by Council with the purpose of fostering collaboration, addressing local challenges, prioritising needs and driving collective actions that contribute to growth, sustainability and effectiveness of the Gold Coast volunteering sector. In its first 12 months, the Action Group has delivered an action register with projects they want to work on and delivered the peer-reviewed resource project in October 2024. The City also offers free community workshops for volunteer groups on topics such as grant writing, how to run a not-for-profit, psychological first aid, and recruiting and retaining volunteers. And those topics are very much driven through collaboration with those volunteering groups about the things that they need to understand to deliver the best service they can. These workshops are open to all community groups and help them to build their skills and networking across the volunteer sector. In 2024, councillors, we offered 16 workshops, of which we had 181 attendees and a 97% satisfaction rate with the content delivered. We also offer collective sector updates. So we have a comprehensive mailing list that is accessible to all volunteering groups. And of course, councillors, we have, and you will be familiar with the Community Grants program, which is operated through the Office of the CEO. As a city, we recognise the invaluable role that volunteers play in strengthening social connections, supporting local services and enhancing resilience across our communities. We continue to acknowledge our volunteers through events such as the annual Volunteer Thank You event, which is held during National Volunteer Week, which is later on this month. We also invest in targeted social media campaigns, which have proven highly effective. In the last campaign cycle, promoting volunteering across the city, we reached over 83,000 people, with our most successful ad generating nearly 45,000 impressions and nearly 900 click-throughs. We also continue to grow our Kind of Gold Coast initiative, which was born during the COVID-19 pandemic and used again in recovery efforts in the post-Christmas storms. Our Kinder is designed to help people feel connected to their community, whether it's meeting a neighbour, attending a class or volunteering, finding out about how to get disaster ready. This program offers practical tools and inspiration for people to get involved. I thought it would be timely to share an example of volunteering through the lens of TC Alfred, which is a great example of spontaneous volunteering, so the groups coming together on the back of a specific event. So the city worked closely with our volunteering sector and organisations to support relief, response and recovery efforts across the city. The Human Social Recovery Group, which is a subgroup of the city's local recovery group, had pulled together, or is comprised, I should say, 11 of the 18 organisations in the Human Social Recovery Group are not-for-profits who rely on volunteers to deliver their own services. These organisations are activated in the case of disaster and help the city to deliver the local recovery plan on a short, medium or sometimes long-term basis. Pictured here is Set Free Care and Churches of Christ Burleigh, who, in addition to the city's 3 main evacuation centres during TC Alfred, established 2 places of refuge in the city, providing 24-hour shelter and refuge to those experiencing homelessness. City staff coordinated the sector response and on a daily basis ensured food, water, bedding and security personnel were on hand around the clock. Over the 6 days these 2 centres were stood up. They provided a total of 814 day visits and 408 overnight stays. I'd like to acknowledge and thank both Set Free Care and Burleigh Churches of Christ and their staff and volunteers for the phenomenal work they undertook during TC Alfred in operating those 2 places of refuge for our most vulnerable residents. As you can see on the screen, volunteer groups also established 8 chill-out zones and 4 neighbourhood centres were activated across the city to support the city, its community, to connect and recharge, both literally and metaphorically, during the disaster event. Another example is Baby Give Back, a Queensland charity with a mission to give children an equal start in life by providing material basics like clothing and nappies to vulnerable families with children between the ages of 0 to 5. They leverage the power of community donation and volunteering to create impact in partnership with social services agencies and health networks to help families in need. At the 2023 Gold Coast Volunteering Collective Forum, which was focused on youth in volunteering, we had a panel with young people sharing their volunteering experiences and tips with attendees. All speakers were under the age of 25, and young people also attending discussed their views on attracting and retaining volunteers. Baby Give Back were there and they listened. And from the advice they received at the forum, they were able to create a much better way for potential volunteers and registration to receive these donations and to make their service more efficient and able to support those in need. Their volunteering rates have been sustained and the organisation is continuing through into 2025. I couldn't talk about volunteering without mentioning the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So the legacy strategy, known as Elevate 2042, will have a focus on building a vibrant and diverse volunteering network. Looking at Paris 2024, they had over 45,000 Games volunteers and 5,000 city volunteers in standing up that successful event. The city, through our 2032 Games unit, is working with the Australian Sports Commission, Volunteering Australia, Volunteering Queensland, Volunteering Gold Coast, and local universities to formulate our strategy with regard to volunteers and legacy outcomes. And councillors, the 2032 volunteer program is currently scheduled to be released after the 2028 LA Olympic and Paralympic Games. Thank you.
Thanks heaps, Kate. It's actually really good just to get a snapshot. I just want to acknowledge in the gallery as well Brad Cooper, CEO of Volunteering Gold Coast. Great to have you with us, Brad. I actually don't know who's with you, but he's probably very important as well. Did you guys have any questions about volunteering on the Gold Coast? It's great. Oh, Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I just missed one thing that you said on the way through, and since asking that, I've lost my presentation. You said there was a percentage of groups that said they needed more volunteers, and I think you said the percentage at the start, and then I missed it, and then I paid more attention when you said.
So nationally, the National Volunteering Strategy identifies 83% of volunteering-involved organisations say they need more volunteers.
83%.
Yep.
So that's nationally not. And do you think the numbers would be fairly consistent here on the Gold Coast, reflective of that 83%?
Through the chair, yes, I think the local context is representative of the national one.
Chair, just another question. I know this is a presentation about what we're doing, but what's the main barrier to volunteer to those groups attracting more volunteers?
Through the chair, I think volunteering is a very complex element. People's motivation for wanting to volunteer will differ, as will the barriers for them. So as I mentioned during the presentation, what we are hearing from a lot of people who had previously volunteered is the social fabric of society has changed, and so their ability to have as much free time and be able to volunteer has changed. I think also the sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
Was in your presentation? It was time, burnout, cost of living.
Correct.
Time, burnout. There was one other, but I can't remember what it was. It was on slide 3 or something.
I think also the way in which people volunteer. So I think volunteering organisations traditionally like to have people with fixed time. So an individual may be scheduled to volunteer on a Tuesday morning on a regular basis. However, individuals don't necessarily want to be as tied in to volunteering in that way. And so there is some work and understanding, both from a Volunteering Queensland and Volunteering Australia perspective, to try and understand how to shift that to match time offered with time needed from those volunteering involved organisations.
And just one final question, Chair. I've had a few people in the last 12 months ask me not know how to get involved, and sometimes we can connect them up with sporting groups or whatever is their interest level. But is there, there are people in the gallery, which the Chair indicated earlier, who was also highly connected with the very successful Robina Braves, Chair.
Yes.
But if people are looking for a way to find a connection to volunteer, if they were inclined, would you direct them to anywhere in particular?
Through the chair, absolutely. So we have our Gold Coast volunteering here in the gallery. They're one potential source of certainly opening the doors for volunteering. We also have we're able to direct people through, if you Google Gold Coast and volunteering in the City of Gold Coast, we will be able to direct people, and we usually redirect around 100 people per quarter for volunteering through the communities branch.
So Gold Coast Volunteering, or Volunteering Gold Coast, something they refer to, has a platform, like a digital platform that can pair up a person's volunteering interest with a volunteering opportunity in the city and even further afield. So, obviously that exists. The best thing I can recommend is jump on the Volunteering Gold Coast website and check it out. And maybe, if you've got 3 hours, no, councillors don't always have 3 hours free in their week because they're obviously spending a lot of time out in their community. But I get that sometimes our job is to lead by example, and using that platform and seeing how it's used and how it works can actually be a really great way to you advising your own community members about opportunities that they can take advantage of to get involved in being a part of that $118 billion economic contribution to the community and in volunteering. If there isn't any further questions, I will move that the presentation be noted and thank Kate for your time today. That's awesome. Does anyone want to second that? Councillor Curtis, thank you. The motion is that the council notes the presentation. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Alrighty, we are now going to get onto something a lot more contentious, very exciting. Fleur and the team are going to present about the street art pilot. No worries. Please, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, councillors. My name's Fleur McManaman, Manager Arts and Culture. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss the street art practice wall pilot for the City of Gold Coast. The proposed pilot will see the first legal, large-scale street art practice spaces offered in the city for urban artists and local creatives wishing to create uncommissioned works. So in July 2024, Council resolved that city officers were to investigate the commissioning of public art as a component of the Ernest Junction Tunnel, Railway Tunnel Amenity Improvement Project. The heritage-listed tunnel in Mollendina is due to be closed as part of the South Coast Rail Trail development and is currently being used as an unofficial street art or graffiti site. We believe it's been used for around 40 years in this way, while there is a zero tolerance for graffiti in the city, and we think it's being used by up to 1,500 users. So
obviously we're a little bit more than zero tolerance.
Yeah.
We have been less than zero.
So this has resulted in an accumulation of around 25 millimetre thick paint in certain areas. And the pilot we're proposing is designed to, 1, divert the activity away from the tunnel surface once it is closed, and 2, build the capacity of the local sector to paint murals and designs on large surfaces. So there are 2 locations proposed for the pilot program, and these will be promoted on the Friends of Ernest Junction Tunnel Facebook page with the aim of transitioning the site to allow for its preservation and a potential mural commission within the tunnel as part of the broader site redevelopment. So the program will be launched with workshops for the community and training sessions for aspiring artists, delivered by experienced street art facilitators. So the project has been informed by learnings and outcomes from models in other areas, and these areas include Canberra, Townsville, Hobart, Brisbane and North Carolina. So the pilot for the Gold Coast is based on this research, and we've included a few case studies of these different areas to highlight the different approaches. And there's a few to get through, but if we could maybe just hold the questions to the end just so I can get through. Thank you. So the first one is the City of Hobart has a permission wall, and I'm just going to note that the following benchmarks across other areas, while they maintain zero tolerance for graffiti outside of the designated practice wall areas, also the main drivers for the program are this professional development and building the capacity of the local sector. So the City of Hobart has a strategic program through short and medium term walls, and they engage an established street art organisation to manage the practice wall. As you can see on the left there, the larger medium-term walls provide that kind of higher quality work that stays there for a little longer. And the image on the right shows an area that is very clearly designated, and that is for the faster turnaround practice with, by those with less experience. They've successfully turned a problematic area into a destination for street art. The next one we're going to look at is in ACT, and there are currently 30 practice sites in Canberra, and they also maintain this zero tolerance for graffiti outside of those areas, but they've really fostered this understanding of street art within the community. And the legal wall at the Woden Drains site is now internationally recognised, and creatives come from all over to paint at these sites. They offer sites ranging from parks, drains and underpasses, which it's really allowed for that diverse approach to be tried and tested in the city. The City of Townsville, they have provided 2 street art walls next to skate park infrastructure and a public art walking trail. They also feature augmented reality experiences, and they've really developed this notable collection of street art through building that capacity within their local community. And then we have Brisbane City Council, who originally offered 1 wall and then extended their program to include 4 street art walls due to the success of the notable outcomes within skills development. Again, they have zero tolerance to graffiti outside of these designated spaces. Artist development is the key driver of this program, and you can see some of the high quality works being produced, which can actually lead to long-term employment for artists with these specific skills on larger surfaces. The next one is in South Carolina. It's the Dow Outdoor Gallery. And they've implemented a temporary program which saw movable walls installed on a vacant block of land. And you can see there was lighting installed, and the temporary walls fill the space with this rotating canvas of street art to form a bit of an art park. So I should note that these case studies have actually recorded very little in the way of data around graffiti reduction, the removal of graffiti or cost-benefit analysis, but there has been anecdotal reports of graffiti reduction in the areas where they've been implemented, as well as evidence of mental health and well-being benefits amongst community members using the walls. The Gold Coast program does aim to record data as part of the 6-month pilot, and I just wanted to turn to some of the potential benefits and outcomes of the pilot program. So several high-profile artists and arts workers who have gone on to celebrate national recognition in the arts started their careers working in style writing or graffiti. This is a really great example. Adnate, in collaboration with Luther Cora, painted this mural for Surface Festival, which is a street art festival in Miami. And this mural went on to win a National Street Art Award. So on the left, you can see Adnate's early works in style writing, and over time his practice developed into highly acclaimed mural work, which sort of includes portraiture and abstract designs as well. And many of you may know that we do put high quality commissions on spaces where we are consistently removing graffiti, so that the graffiti can be removed a lot easier and it's less likely to be hit with that particular graffiti.
Can I ask a question just about this one? So what you're showing us here is Adnate is the name of an artist, and that on the left-hand side is that artist's earlier work, and the right-hand side is that artist's work after a period of development and professional development.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
As part of the pilot, specialist street artists and muralists will be engaged to deliver workshops, training sessions, and create connections with organisations who've been working with specific community groups. And city officers have identified significant interest and demand for spaces for practice street art in legal context, particularly from organisations working with youth and marginalised community members. Now, there are risks associated with graffiti spill and antisocial behaviour, which have been outlined in the report around the chosen locations, and this will be mitigated through a process of ongoing management. So we'll work very closely with the city's community safety team and the city's painting team and the Ernest Junction Tunnel project team to develop and manage the program, if endorsed by council, to proceed. So messaging will be very clear. that whilst providing these practice spaces, the city will still maintain that zero tolerance for graffiti in unauthorised spaces, as the other LGAs have done, to avoid any perception of leniency towards graffiti or vandalism. So the sites, we have identified some suitable sites, which has included some different factors, including environmental factors, safety factors, and there has been a pretty comprehensive risk assessment done as part of a multi-criteria site assessment, including considering that fine line between distance from residents and visibility to the public to ensure the success of the program. So several sites have been assessed applying the criteria, and 2 sites are being proposed as part of the pilot. The first site is at Arthur Earl Park in Nerang, utilising sections of the underpass and potentially a temporary wall being installed. Street art has previously been practiced here, and we've also been made aware of some programs delivered in the past in this area where practice walls were provided and a reduction in graffiti was actually reported. The next one is Expressive Grounds, which is a youth art space in Palm Beach. The site has a long history of street art where some now established Gold Coast artists painted at the site during their emerging careers. A temporary wall would be considered, as well as the underpass concrete sections. Expressive Ground is a council asset that is currently listed as a local arts hub within the Community Services Review Plan, Community Services and Facilities Plan, and has been leased to Transport and Main Roads during a period of M1 upgrades. TMR contracts have reported removing graffiti approximately every 3 days from the site. So providing these kind of authorised spaces may see a reduction in that removal cost. And the site handover back to the city from TMR is expected in May 2025, and will work with the lessees to arrange the launch of the pilot here. So across the 2 suburbs for the proposed locations, the city's already spending around about $50,000 for graffiti removal per year, and this will be used as our baseline data. So when we return to council with an update on the pilot's outcomes, that will be included should the pilot be endorsed. Now, to mitigate some of the risks, a combination of signage options will be implemented, also based on benchmarking in other areas, to clearly communicate project boundaries and to reduce the spill and unauthorised tagging or vandalism. The site will be closely managed, including the rapid removal of vandalism and regular inspections. Guidelines will also be published and promoted online to encourage a culture of respectful use of site, which in other areas has actually seen the community effectively managing site maintenance themselves. So the project has really taken into consideration the risk of not diverting Ernest Junction Tunnel artists to controlled alternative sites, and this may lead to an increase in graffiti across the city and an increase in graffiti removal costs. Also, the 2032 Games may include some investment in urban art commissions, and you can see some examples here in Paris on sporting infrastructure. So local artists are required to have demonstrated ability to create work or design at large scale when submitting their work for the city's professional public art commissions. And this initiative will build capacity in the sector over time so that the Gold Coast creative community have the skills to tell our story as a city when all eyes turn to this region in 2032. So if endorsed, the timing of the pilot, we will probably launch around June 2025, and it will run for 6 months, with the report being brought back to council within 12 months, outlining the outcomes and any relevant data that we've collected. So in summary, the Gold Coast reputation for high-quality urban art continues to grow through initiatives like Water Walls, Art Box, Art Walk, and the city's partnership with Surface Festival. The proposed investment in street art aims to foster local talent, community pride, and enhance the cultural identity of the Gold Coast, which is partly shaped by its connection to skate and surf culture. The main driver of the program is to upskill local artists to submit work for large-scale mural commissions by giving them legal places to practice. And while the program does not seek to solve all graffiti in the city, it does propose to solve the potential increase of graffiti in the unauthorised places once the Ernest Junction Tunnel is closed for redevelopment. Thank you again for the opportunity to outline the details of the proposed street art practice wall pilot.
Cool. That's great. I like the examples. Do you guys have some questions? Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you. You mentioned the cost of graffiti removal, and I think you suggested at $50,000 per year for our city, but it was over $1 million at one point not so long ago. So my question is that figure correct, $50,000 a year for graffiti removal?
Through the chair. So that $50,000 cost is just based on Nerang and Palm Beach suburbs alone. Yeah.
So across the city, what is the total for graffiti removal at the moment?
I would have to take that on notice and get back to you if that's okay, Councillor.
It was definitely over $1 million a year that the city was investing in that. You also mentioned that a trial has been done before, or street art has been supported before in the city, and that it resulted in a reduction of graffiti. When was that done? Where was that done? And how was that data collected? Because I simply don't recall, other than a particular wall at Southport being painted under authority. It wasn't graffiti though, it was street art.
Through the chair, as mentioned previously, we don't have any specific data recorded. However, in our consultations with Councillor Young, he had reported some programs where Nerang was involved in using certain street art practice walls, and I believe even the QPS were involved in coming and providing barbecues, and youth organisations were involved, and it was an anecdotal report of a reduction in graffiti while those programs were run, and I'd have to get back to you on the timing of when that program was run.
Okay, so it was specific to a divisional project
experience
within Nerang. I know that I had a number of requests at Upper Coomera for council walls to be made available, which I avoided because I have a problem really with endorsing something that's illegal. So I was just interested when you said that it had been done before and that it resulted in a decrease. I thought there might be some data associated with that comment. Thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is a little bit off-centre, I guess, and it kind of follows, I guess, Councillor Gates's to a degree, just in the sense of when we're looking for a bit of data on this kind of information and these types of initiatives. I know we do things like our water walls and our art box program and a few other really great initiatives through the city. Have we seen some changes to behaviour since the introduction of those particular initiatives as far as a reduction in our graffiti across the city?
Through the chair, many of those murals and high-quality commissions have been instigated by the fact that those particular sites are really hit by graffiti quite often. So that is one of the main drivers for installing those murals, because the murals provide that sort of beautification of city assets, but they also have anti-graffiti coating on the top of them, and it makes it quite easy to remove any tagging or vandalism that is unauthorised. So there have been some great outcomes in regard to, the perception of safety, because they're not seeing offensive material, they're seeing beautiful pictures on the walls. So we have a little bit of data around graffiti removal costs. However, we don't have data on graffiti, if that makes sense. But yeah, we have seen some really great outcomes, and this program is really centred around the benchmarking that's been done and using other models. And while there hasn't been a lot of data recorded there, this pilot does aim to record data and then bring those outcomes back. Yeah,
I can speak just from a divisional perspective about a reduction anecdotally. So since the Art Box program has happened, we've had less damage and less graffiti on those assets, and I think there's two reasons for that. Firstly, I think there's this piece around graffiti artists maybe not wanting to graffiti over the top of other art. They're much more inclined to get their tag on a place that is more visible to them. And secondly, I think the anti-graffiti treatment that goes on those vinyl wraps, I think what we don't see is, we don't really see, definitely in Division 9 anyway, we don't see that Art Box program redeploy graffiti artists. It's other artists that get commissioned for that work, and I think the substance of this matter is much more about this idea that we are going to shut Ernest Junction down for a different purpose. There are graffiti artists that flock to that place on a relatively regular basis, which I'm sure you'd know, and, you know, creating an art opportunity for some of those artists elsewhere might end up with an unexpected benefit, which I think the example of which is that Adnate artist, which looks like it was kind of a street, you know, lettering at one point, and it has turned into a much more mural type style of artist. That progression has occurred, and I think that's kind of what we're looking for. Councillor Fowler and then Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I was just curious about the data that you did present on the 1,500 displaced street artists. Is that figure from the Ernst Junction tunnel, and over what period of time are we saying that we're displacing 15? How do we get that figure?
Through the Chair, I would probably have to go back to the Ernst Junction tunnel team. However, that is the figure. It's very approximate, and probably throughout the entire period that it has been used as a street.
I would imagine over the 40 years, some of those street artists have probably grown up and they're not using that facility anymore. So
Who knows, Councillor Fowler?
I'm just curious I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the connection between the Ernst Junction tunnel and the street art projects. And even if we had some regular street artists that did go to the tunnel, and frequent it now, which I'm sure that we do, probably a smaller number than 1,500. How are we communicating with them other than a Facebook page that they might not be on, that there's these new projects? How are they going to get that message out? And do we really think that that's going to change behaviour of what's happening in that project over to Palm Beach and the project at Nerang?
Yeah, that's a good question. By what mechanism are we going to let these artists know?
Through the Chair, while there's no fail-safe guaranteed method of getting the message through, there will be guidelines promoted on the sites, and we are aware
at Ernest Junction. At Ernest Junction, when we do this construction project, where I'm assuming we're ripping off 25 mils of paint from the internal walls, we're going to let them know at that location that there's other locations where they can draw.
I believe so,
bridges.
yes. So the tunnel team is communicating with the Friends of Ernest Junction Tunnel, and they've got communication with particular communities, creative communities, and it's very much word of mouth. We have been aware that people travel from the Northern Rivers and down south to come to that site, particularly because it is a site quite associated with that activity. And if there is no alternative, they will be possibly going to other areas and going to unauthorised areas to continue that activity. So we're also aware that local artists who don't want to partake in illegal activity have to go to other areas like Brisbane or other places that do provide legal practice walls. So it's really just about the opportunity of providing something, an alternative, and the communication and messaging will be through our channels, through our creative e-newsletters, and through word of mouth through the community, and also engaging some of the community members who are associated with people really interested in street art, and just making sure that they're aware that there is that alternative. And I believe that there would be some kind of signage and diversion as well in place. Yeah.
Of course you can.
And I just wanted to also ask through you, Chair, is just in relation to how the process would work. So if I'm a street artist, do I need to be commissioned to use these walls? Do I do a piece of art and then the next day someone paints over my piece of art? Or does my piece of art stay up for a period of time? And who governs that? How is it monitored on site?
Through the Chair, so we will have street art facilitators managing the sites. There will be some dedicated to the medium-term walls where you will have those higher quality uncommissioned works, so they won't have to go through a process like the public art policy and procedures. It is for artists wanting to do partake in respectful culture, so there will be guidelines as mentioned, but it is often managed through that word of mouth, and the project officers managing the site will also be delineating these are the medium term walls, and often if anecdotally, we understand that if someone sees a high quality, larger piece of work that is dedicated for those spaces and it's been communicated through the community and the officers, they will respect that and they won't want to paint over a really beautiful piece that they know is dedicated for longer, uncommissioned works. And then there will be designated areas, as some of them were shown in the slides, that have short, fast turnaround, and people will just know that if it's been there, for a while, that they use the sections of the wall that have been there longer. So there is an actual culture involved in this street art scenario and community. So
one question I just had on that, sorry, is just how is our people? So a city office is going to be down there on site managing this day and night, or are we closing it at night, or how does that work logistically?
Through the chair, no, it won't be monitored day and night 24/7. We've tried to choose locations where the activity has happened in the past and people have practiced street art in the past. It will be managed regularly, so there will be a project officer dedicated to actually removing offensive material, managing spill, rubbish removal, and so there will be quite a lot of on-site management with the city's painting team, which may actually reduce some of their workload because we have a dedicated person managing these particular sites, not day and night, however, but we will be working closely with the community safety team to see if there might be some cameras or mobile cameras in the area if necessary. Yeah.
Can I ask a question just to clarify your answer here? You've used a phrase a few times, this idea of medium term, short term. Like, what does that actually mean? What's a short-term turnaround and what's a medium-term turnaround?
Through the chair, we would be encouraging more complex, higher quality works for about 3 months on the medium-term walls.
Yeah. And
and then there will be a process of particular refresh, and maybe some of those walls will be brought back to a blank canvas, and then that will be started again. And the training sessions and workshop sessions would be centred around those timeframes where people are encouraged to come and paint new murals on those medium-term walls, whereas the short-term fast turnaround will just be people just wanting to practice.
Have a go,
and probably on the temporary walls in this particular case.
Yeah. I had Councillor Doran next.
Thank you, Chair. We have a graffiti reporting function via the city app, and I'm so curious as to the answer to say we don't have the data around graffiti. I guess we'd have the data as to how much has been reported on the city app. Is that information that can be distributed to councillors?
We can get that on notice.
Yep.
Yeah, I reckon Rod can he's probably got a thing in his phone that can probably pull it up right now, because that's his bag, man. So before full council, we're going to get the cost of graffiti removal across the city, and if there's a way to segment that by location, that will be helpful to councillors, I think. And then a piece around the use of the city app to report graffiti and other mechanisms to report graffiti in the city before council. That'd be good. Councillor Doran still has the floor. I'm going to come back to you in a second. Oh, yeah, of course.
Just in relation to that, Chair, can it also be expanded with Councillor Doran being accepting of it too, in relation to just the reported problem, not just isolated to the app, but I'd imagine people may report graffiti not only through the app, but the reporter problem
so I think,
function.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So other mechanisms to report graffiti as well, yeah. We'll get that across. Councillor Doran still has the floor, and then we'll go to anyone else.
What's the cost of implementing this program? I think in our discussion, I thought it was fully grant funded and supported, but reading the report, there seems to be a cost allocation. Could you just clear that up for me, please?
Through the chair, this program has allocation through our broader arts innovation program, Art on the Streets, which has been funded through the innovation program. The city's innovation
fund. So the city's innovation program has
yeah.
funded an art innovation exercise, and there's an allocation of funds through that, which is an operational allocation.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to before council? Can you grab us the figure before council? You don't have to say it right now, or do you know it right now?
Yeah. So through the chair, the current allocation is $110,000 for this particular program, and in the report it has outlined there the costs and also an indication of ongoing costs should the program be successful and continued to be around about $60,000 to $70,000 a year, which would be through existing arts and culture.
If I recall correctly, the innovation fund is funded through overall operational savings through the Office of the CEO. Is that right? Thank you, Kate. Awesome. So I've got Councillor Wilkinson, then Councillor Fowler.
I'm still going.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Doran still has the floor.
Is this you got? Thanks.
Sorry, mate.
That's okay.
Sorry, sir.
You mentioned before there's no evidence to suggest that this will lead to any decrease in vandalism, which I call it, not graffiti, in my area. Why should we proceed with giving groups that are, to use your phrase with all due respect, you said that they're a respectful culture. They're not very respectful when they go and vandalise throughout all of Robina and Varsity Lakes. So what makes you think that they're going to divert their energy into the 2 walls in the city that you're giving them as a reward for vandalising via their graffiti in my area?
Through the chair.
It's a very big question there.
Through the chair, there is no guarantee that that may occur, and particular criminal activity may continue. As mentioned, we're not trying to solve graffiti through the city. We're trying to mitigate the potential increase of graffiti by not providing an alternative site for the Ernest Junction Tunnel users. However, as mentioned previously, through all of the benchmarking and in discussions with other council officers in local government areas and even programs that have occurred here on the Gold Coast in the past, there has been reports that some of that activity has ceased and been channeled into a more professional practice through providing opportunities.
Well, I guess that's part of the question, Chair, is the logic here is that we need to provide these vandals an opportunity to do it somewhere monitored. But I went to Officeworks on the weekend. I could buy a big canvas. Why can't they do it on not a public wall? Why do they have to have a wall to practice their form of artwork? This is the only subsector of art that I can tell that needs to do it on a public wall legally, consistently, and then we reward because we want to divert them from somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's an ideological question. You're asking an ideological question, not an operational question.
I'm asking why we need to give them a public wall to practice their art. That's the logic. One of the logics is it's going to foster the artist culture.
And I get that, but the council officer has provided a presentation today about and given examples of artists that have turned into artists having previously been letter writers. And your question is an ideological question that is for councillors to decide, not for officers to decide. You're asking, why will this work? The answer to that question is a matter for every councillor to answer and not for an operational officer.
But it's stated in the report as one of the reasons for suggesting this is to foster local artists'
And the
skills.
example was given of Adnate, which is one of the artists there, who used to write like a graffiti artist letter writing and is now, won a national award for murals. So the answer to your question is sometimes it works. But this ideological question is why is it going to work or not is as a matter for councillors and not for an officer.
I think it's not actually what I'm saying with all respect.
Okay, so rephrase the question.
What I said was, why do we need to give them a public wall to practice their skill?
Again, that's a question for councillors to answer, because the recommendation of officers based on what's happening is that these walls might redeploy activity that is costing the city money, and that's the matter for us. So you can ask the officers any question you like about the report, but that particular question is a matter for your colleagues and not for the officer.
It's in the report, but you're the chair, so.
Thanks. Councillor Fowler, I think you were now. Councillor Wilkinson and then Councillor Fowler, sorry. No, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just wanted to get a bit of an idea. We do hear, or we're hearing about monitoring the graffiti, I guess, uptake or reduction through the 6-month trial period. How do we intend to monitor that? Is that simply going to be through the mechanisms of the reported problem, or is there going to? I recognise that there was going to be more patrol-like kind of observations from city officers as well. I just wanted to see if you could give a bit of an expansion on that process, so that way, when we get to the end of the 6-month trial, how do we actually know whether there has been an increase or decrease? What's that look like?
Through the chair, we will just be monitoring the graffiti and the graffiti removal in the particular area of the street art practice walls. Again, this particular pilot doesn't aim to eliminate graffiti across the city. It's the main aim is to provide a space for practice to upskill local creatives. We will capture the data and, as mentioned, we'll use the graffiti removal costs within the particular suburb where the location, the practice wall locations will be, and then we will come back to let you know whether there has been any reduction in that cost so that we can outline some cost-benefit analysis for the particular program in the particular area, if that answers the question.
Answers the question, yeah. They're good. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I'm also interested in the additional costs from an operational ongoing perspective, particularly in security. So you've mentioned that perhaps there's some security initiatives that might be explored, whether that's CCTV or cameras or lighting or whatever that may look like, because that's also a real cost of the program. Do you know at this stage if you are considering any of those security initiatives, or is it the plan to wait and see if this is approved and see if those initiatives are required on site?
Through the Chair, the purpose of today's presentation is just to get endorsement to commence a pilot program, and we will be working closely with the community safety team to very carefully assess the risks and sites themselves to see if there are any implementations for security measures or cameras or lighting, etc., that can be implemented, and then we'll bring back that the findings of how that's gone throughout the pilot program period. So really today we're just here to see if all of the councillors are, and council is happy for us to proceed with this proposed pilot, and after the 6 months we will gather all the data and that critical analysis and bring it back in a report.
Yep.
Chair, do we feel like there's time before council that perhaps city officers could talk to our safety team and perhaps look at the sites and see if there is any initiatives they would recommend for the pilot? The reason being is there would be a cost associated with that, and it would be good to see the cost of the entire pilot project if those initiatives are taking place.
So maybe a question through you, Fleur, to Kate. The innovation program allocation of $110,000, is that sufficient to cover both labour costs and an allocation for cameras, or is there an additional allocation that would be required for things like cameras or other security?
Through the Chair, the allocation is currently for the implementation of the pilot program, and we have worked very closely with community safety. They are stakeholders within the report. They have suggested
they've already been consulted
about this program, and while no other local government areas we believe have cameras or other installed safety security measures, we would assume that would be determined if those antisocial behaviours or risks that we were seeing those at the site, then they would be implemented. So we haven't. But
we would do that anyway, wouldn't we? Like if we saw antisocial behaviour in a particular location, we'd implement those things anyway.
Absolutely. I think there is a safety camera network and mobile cameras assigned to that particular behaviour across the city. So we haven't had any recommendations to assign any additional costs at this stage. However, I think we would need to go through the pilot program period to understand if there were any of those problems and whether or not it was the right area or whether or not we cease the activity in particular areas as opposed to spending further budget on safety measures.
Can I ask a question then, just to follow up from that to Councillor Martin? Your expressive ground, I think it's in your division, is that correct? What are your thoughts about antisocial behaviour or risks associated with the program? Do you think that cameras in that area will be necessary? Were you to, you're obviously the guinea pig here, and we don't know if this is going to work or not. What are your thoughts on?
Well, I'd start by saying expressive ground, is a place that's had street art on the building. I mean, so for me, that's already been occurring. I mean, I hear the arguments, and I absolutely hate vandalism, hate graffiti, but I think street art is a different kettle of fish.
Yes.
So there's already been a practice at expressive ground. So I think that will happen. I have concerns that area will be tagged and graffitied anyway. So I think I'm supportive of a trial and a pilot, given I've already got street art there. There's some real changes there with the new M1, and it's different. We haven't seen how that will operate. So I'm very keen to see through this pilot how that reduces the cost of how we can harness it, how we can channel it, and how we can reduce graffiti or street art in other areas. So I'm willing to give it a go and see the results of the pilot.
Okay. All right. Councillor Fowler, you did have the floor and I interrupted with other questions. Are you okay? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Chair. And through you. Look, probably builds a little bit on Councillor Martin. Knowing that the pilot you'll come back to us in July 26, like what does success look like? What are we can't know this time next year that it's an emerging artist that's going to be at the Olympics. So I feel, are we just looking at the graffiti data as our success measure?
It's a good question. What does success look like?
Through the chair, I think success would look like an upskill in local creatives' ability, and really building those well-being and community outcomes that we have seen in other programs. But also, I just wanted to note the fact that while we'll be working very closely with community safety and the city's painting team, who are often going to places that are being, tagged and vandalised,
and probably seeing tags and vandals. Right. So they're actually seeing the humans doing it as well while they're doing their job.
Potentially, yes. And the officers assigned to these programs will actually be tasked with removing those much quicker because they're managing the sites. So by implementing this program in places where we're already seeing tagging and vandalism and removing it quicker and trying to introduce a culture of respectful site management, we are hoping that that's what success will look like for these particular sites and these particular areas, fostering that culture of respect. Also educating people that graffiti and vandalism in unauthorised areas is not okay. It's disrespectful. It's disrespectful to the community and property owners, and that will be a part of our implementation as part of this. So we will be inviting, community safety have a stall on graffiti prevention management while we're doing workshops and while we're engaging the community and giving them a space and an opportunity to, make some great work and eventually aspire to do some mural commissions. I mean, that's very much the aim of the program, as I mentioned, not to solve graffiti across the city, but to reduce the increase if there is no alternative when the Ernest Junction Tunnel is closed.
And just so I'm very clear, there isn't any proposed change to tolerance levels in managing graffiti in other locations. We're not going to change the way we already respond to those, reports.
That's correct. Yeah. And even speaking with other local government officers, they've said, look, graffiti, this is not about graffiti, this is about professional development. And in certain cases, we see people diverted away from illegal activity because they have a legal space.
Yeah, got it. Okay, got it. Any other questions? All right. Does anyone feel bold enough to move the item? Councillor Castro. That's great. Thank you, Councillor Castro. And Councillor Martin, have to second it as one of the divisional councillors who's going to experiment with this pilot. So we've got a mover in Councillor Castro for the item and a seconder in Councillor Martin. Councillor Castro, do you want to open debate?
Yeah, look, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I have the same concerns that have been expressed. I think we probably all share the same concerns about, one, whether this will work. As we know, there are no guarantees. We don't know whether it's going to work. I absolutely detest vandalism. I don't call graffiti art either. I agree with Councillor Doran. It's vandalism. But I do believe that there is a very strong argument to. I see it more of a potential rehabilitation program. I guess that. It's worth the experiment to see if we can divert this criminal behaviour and actually turn that into something more positive. There's a saying that there's honour among thieves. It's a similar thing.
Not familiar with that phrase.
Hopefully there's honour among vandals as well. And I think it's interesting because back in late 90s, early 2000. Before people like Councillor Hamill were even born. So I thought
that's right. He's got grey in his beard. Councillor Wilkinson doesn't have any grey in his beard.
Oh, and Councillor Joe, I suppose. But yeah, there we go. There was something I was actually part of the Division 8 electorate was the Silver Bridle area, actually in Mollendina. And we had major issues with vandalism. So not just graffiti, but with everything, just damage to buildings, the community centre that was there. And back then we were able to expend funds to put programs in place to engage young people, divisionally, and get them involved. I undertook a beautification of the area. So it was a tree planting, it was cleaning up the graffiti, it was all sorts of things. and we got all the local youth who were causing the problems to get involved. And it was amazing the turnaround in the fact that they had actually planted these trees, they had actually cleaned the graffiti off these walls, and all of a sudden they had this ownership. And when someone came in and ripped out a tree or drove over a tree or started graffitiing the walls, it was like, well, hang on, I just cleaned that up and I planted that tree, and now you've... So there was a massive turnaround. It really was quite significant, and I see this potentially as something that could work the same way.
Like that.
And again, if we have one of these walls and somebody comes and graffitis over somebody's street art, they see their work as street art, and maybe it is. Maybe there are a few talented young people out there. They're going to get pretty cheesed off when someone comes on and they actually see what it's like when someone comes and graffitis and tags their work. So I'm not absolutely certain this is going to work either, but I certainly think it's worth a shot. And if we can, just channel that behaviour and change the practice, I think we should give it a go.
Thanks, Councillor Castro.
Yeah.
Speakers against. Councillor Gates. I'll come back to you, Councillor Doran. Councillor Doran, please.
Thank you, Chair. So a local constituent who you will be aware of, who has a business in your area called Ross, talks to me a lot about this, and happened to bring this up a little while ago in the previous committee. I raised it and you said we have to wait because it's coming. And so I have given this a lot of thought, and I appreciated very much the hour I spent with the team talking to me about this particular pilot program. There was a genuine curiosity in my brain about where to get it. It wasn't ideological. But I arrived at a position, reading the report, that this is unnecessary and generates a tolerance of what I experience in Robina and Varsity Lakes as illegal behaviour, which is constant tagging, but not just tagging, street art, as we will call it, in our community. And I just want to touch on a few points here. Let's say we set up two pilot programs which will act as de facto galleries for their work. Most people don't put their first attempt on the gallery, they will practice it somewhere else. So what I'm concerned about here is that before they go and put their masterpiece at Expressive Grounds, they go and practice in Robina, the smaller scale, the next scale, because they don't want to put their worst work in front of their peers, which is part of the explanation as to why this might work, because peers won't want to graffiti other people's work. So I think it will lead to an implied tolerance of vandalism and graffiti, or graffiti that I'm defining as vandalism. I think it will increase the cost to the city to clean up graffiti in our community. I think we shouldn't in any way imply to the community that this is okay. I think that artists can express themselves on various forms of mediums. You can do a graffiti style piece of work on a canvas that's not a public property. I worry about when we set these up, the antisocial behaviour that could be clustered around what is essentially an underpass of the M1, so not overly exposed to ongoing folks or walkers or people, and another slightly isolated, whilst because it's in Palm Beach, extraordinarily impressive, no doubt, location, which is slightly away as well. So we are going to either have to put safety cameras fixed there, or Councillor Martin and Councillor Young may have to divert mobile CCTV stations, one of their allocation to this place, to keep an eye on location. And to use Councillor Castro's term before, if they get cheesed off that somebody else has painted over their artwork, does that create a tension at these locations that needs to be managed either by law enforcement, of course not by city officers? And then I come back to the costs. We're entering in a budget phase, and we need to be mindful of some of the programs that we're spending money on. And this particular program, I think isn't something that we should support, especially when there's a recurring OPEX cost to it should we endorse past the pilot project. And I don't think that that this is the medium for these artists to practice their means. We have other ones which are listed in the report: art box, art walk, water walls. I'd be quite happy if one of the local artists who continually tag Robina wants to submit designs for consideration on art box, because that's the process, and it's a process because we decide where it goes, we decide when it goes up, and we decide what it is. But there is a medium there for it if they want it. I think that that's the proper process for which they should express themselves and increase their skills. So.
Councillor Doran, thank you. Anyone want to speak for? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I simply rise to put on public record that I support diverting illegal graffiti away from the Ernest Junction Tunnel as a proactive and strategic approach to preserving the heritage significance of the tunnel while addressing the broader issue of illegal graffiti. Informed by comprehensive research and benchmarking, I can see that the pilot provides an alternative legal outlet for artists to express themselves with a focus on the community, cultural and well-being benefits highlighted as in the report or the presentation today. By offering a sanctioned space for street artists to develop and practice their engagement with the community, the initiative supports the city's cultural, economic and social objectives as well. My understanding is we're spending nominally half of the amount that the requested funding we're already putting towards the removal of graffiti at those two proposed sites annually. So the amount sought, in my opinion, is not unreasonable for this pilot. I want to give thanks to both Judith and Ted DeBoer from the Friends of the Ernest Junction Tunnel Group for their positive engagement with the city as these considerations have been put forward. I'm approaching this with optimism. With the success of other street art walls in other states and just up the road in Brisbane, I wait with anticipation to see how the practice wall pilot goes over the 6-month period and hope to see the same positive outcomes from this initiative within the city that others have experienced. Noting that if the desired outcomes are not achieved, Council still has the power to determine that at a future time as to the direction we continue on. So I think this is worth a shot, and I just wanted to put that on the public record.
Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Gates.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. I'm not on this committee, so I don't get a vote, but my interest is how a so-called street artist learns their craft. And I can't help but think they learn their craft by tagging ratepayer-funded city infrastructure. So I'm very uncomfortable with trying to encourage the practice on a piece of public infrastructure. I'm fully supportive of the Art Box program, and we've seen there's a big difference between graffiti vandalism and the appointment of professional artists who have done some very large projects for us, and one that I really love is the big Gold Coast water building at Upper Coomera, where a professional artist painted, and it's been so successful. But that's different from saying or endorsing street art. Street art, in my view, is just a progression of graffiti vandalism, because that's how they progress. And it's great to see someone that has improved. But I agree with Councillor Doran. They shouldn't be practising on community-funded infrastructure. We've worked really hard as a city in my time on this council, because I do recall graffiti removal costs getting up to about $1.2 million. And I think we'll find when we get that report ahead of full council that it's under $1 million now, and it's because we've had a 5-day turnaround in graffiti removal, and I think a 24-hour time frame we hope to achieve for any obscene graffiti that might not be graffiti art, as it's so called, but tagging that's obscene. So the initiatives to date seem to be working, and we are a young, clean city with a surf, sun and sand and water-based water sports culture. And I just think it's a terrible shame to go into this space and how we make it clear to people that on the one hand graffiti is illegal, but on the other we want to help you develop your art. I think there are better ways for them to develop their art than on ratepayer-funded facilities. So I won't be supportive of the trial.
Okay. Any other speakers for? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Chair, and through you. Look, I came to the committee today probably really on the fence and wanting to hear what I guess people thought. For me, the tunnel and underpass were almost a like for like. We were closing one and hoping that the same people that used the tunnel would gravitate. It was the Palm Beach location where I felt we were opening up a section that, yeah, I don't know if it was a known section, but obviously hearing from Councillor Martin that it is a section that's heavily graffitied always, and that it is costing us 60 to 70,000, I think, in the report that to clean that. I think a trial, I can see the merits in a trial. I guess that my question around what success looks like, but is just I don't want to come back this time next year and just simply be talking about the fostering of other people's talents and arts, because I do agree with Councillor Doran that we don't necessarily give this free art to other artists. This is almost, we'll have to go buy a canvas for different parts of art, but we're going to give a free city wall for this. So I see the merit in it, and I guess Councillor Martin's argument around his site was the one that I was the most worried about. So knowing that he's positive, I am going to support it today. But I guess my biggest concern is just I probably need some sort of metric as to how we're going to measure success in 12 months. I think there needs to be something a little bit more data-driven as opposed to, I won't say soft argument, but an argument that we're developing an artist for a period of time into the future. So I will be supporting today, but I'd hope that we can come up with some kind of metric to measure success.
Yeah. Any other speakers against? I'm going to finish with some closing remarks and then throw to Councillor Casher to close debate. I think this idea that there'll be an acceleration in graffiti in the city is problematic. I don't think necessarily that will be the case. I think that the graffiti community is, I think there's a fixed group of people that like to engage with the community asset in that way, and we call it illegal, and it is what it is. But I think there's a demographic, there's a group of persons that engage that way, and I think this idea that by providing these opportunities, that we're going to see an acceleration in the number of people undertaking graffiti in the city, I think is questionable at best. I think we're going to redeploy existing graffiti artists into, or graffiti vandals, whatever word, into at least some of them into a better option. The second thing is, I think that as much as I'd like to think this city is the best city in the world, we still have antisocial behaviour, and particularly in underpasses and places that are dark and places that are, maybe graffiti. There's antisocial behaviour that occurs in the city, and I don't think this program is going to accelerate or amplify more antisocial behaviour. In fact, I think it's going to regulate some of those spaces in a way that potentially will have a downward pressure on antisocial behaviour in those locations. And I think when people see things that they see as beautiful, even if I don't see them as beautiful, or they see them as interesting, or they see them as artistic, people act less antisocially when they see things, artistic things. They act. There's heaps of research around there where people see artistic and beautiful and things they like. They don't act more antisocially. They act less antisocially. And I think that's something to think about. The thing that hasn't been touched on today, I think, is really interesting, is then in the examples of places where this has been done before, it's actually an economic kind of impact from an art tourism perspective. And I think there's a missed opportunity here. If we do this well, there's actually an art tourism economic impact that is understated, and no one has really spoken about that at this stage. But I think I have confidence and faith in the artistic community that will be something that might happen that we didn't expect. The idea that there are some incredible artists like Adnate, and you spoke before about the example of someone who was effectively writing letters on walls and is now being commissioned for murals. There is some really exciting art, tourism, economic impact piece that has not been stated today. And finally, I think whenever we face a problem in the city, we have, and it's a problem we've got to solve, we have this idea if there's either a stick or a carrot. And one thing I have noticed in 13 years is that sometimes carrots work. Sometimes carrots work really well. And what I was really encouraged by is there's no difference in sticks. We're still going to get rid of graffiti as quickly as we can. We're still going to have the same team managing graffiti. I think we've got a great team who do that. The city maintenance team led by Michael Ham does a wonderful job in trying to make sure that that is done well. I don't think that's going to, I don't have any, I'm totally reassured that that's going to continue. And with that in mind, I think councillors and this committee should support this motion moved by Councillor Castro and actually back the program to see those good outcomes happen. And hopefully this carrot, as opposed to a stick, can not only result in a positive economic impact, but also, redeploy someone's idea of what is great art into a more functional and productive way of expressing their creativity. Councillor Castro, I'm happy to throw to you close, but they're my thoughts.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, again, I understand the concerns that have been expressed by some councillors, and I think Councillor Doran spoke about the concern about having these particular sites, and are there going to be issues that we can't, that are going to escalate because it's an underpass and it's dark, but the fact is, these young people are doing this anyway. Yeah. They're doing this in areas that we can't monitor. So in many ways, I think it's better if we can corral them, if you like, to another site where we do have some sort of control, where we can monitor and we can have some sort of guidance there to. We've got more chance of stopping, bad things happening. If we're on top of it, whereas if not, they're all over the place doing it everywhere. We don't know where they are, what they're doing, and it's more dangerous. It's a bit like for me, it's a bit like the schoolies argument as chair of events for many years. I've had people saying, you need to ban schoolies. Schoolies is terrible. But I'm saying, well, you can't ban it because the kids are going to come here anyway. So if you just say we're not going to support schoolies and you're not going to put any money into schoolies, they're going to want to come because they want to go to Surfers Paradise. It's what young people want to do.
Great example.
So if you can actually bring them in and you can actually control that, it's in a controlled environment, it's much better than just having this disorganised chaos. If you can at least have some organised chaos, if you like. And I see this the same way. Again, I'm not sitting here saying it's going to work. I can't even say I'm optimistic, like I think Councillor Joe said. He said, I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful, but it's got to be worth a shot. And so I hope this is supported. And if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. But at least we know we've tried. So
that's great. I'm going to take the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Yes, of course. Councillor Doran would like his vote recorded in the negative. Thank you, team. Great to have you with us. I think we're changing over to environment stuff now, aren't we? Who have we got? Is Alex here? Hey, Alex is. All right, our next item actually relates to native vegetation mapping. I'm not sure if Andrew or DJ or who's going to be the presenter today.
There's no decent cups here. Little kidlets. Did you bring it with you? No, it's there.
Welcome. Good morning. Wonderful as always. Oh, please. Yeah, fine. All right. Let's just so I'm clear, is it meant to say 2021 update?
Yes.
It is. So it's an update since 2021.
And we will explain.
Okay, great. Awesome. Let's do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your time, councillors. My name is Andrew Attewell. I'm the board.
Andrew, just say it's on now. So just when you're speaking, is this your first time on the mic?
Yes.
Welcome. All right. So you'll see a little light underneath the microphone. So just on the thing here, there's a little light there. When that light's on, your microphone's on. When the light's off, your microphone's off.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. My name's Andrew Attewell. I'll be here presenting on the native vegetation mapping for 2021, and I'm the coordinator for biodiversity programs and partnerships in the conservation strategy team. And so the city, in our council plan, we have a vegetation cover target of 51% native vegetation cover, and the extent and condition of the city's native vegetation is an important health check for a functional natural area network. And by protecting and restoring native vegetation, we can ensure the ongoing viability of large habitat areas and allow for the movement of flora and fauna across the city's landscape, whilst providing maximum livability for our community. So these are our results for the latest mapping that's been released by the Queensland Herbarium. So we're currently, from 2005 up until 2021, the city's vegetation cover has increased from 50.56% cover to 50.87% cover. And so that means more than half of the city is covered in native vegetation. And importantly for this slide is the condition of our native vegetation cover has improved. And also, that's demonstrated by our percentage of remnant vegetation increasing here. The proportion of our existing vegetation that is remnant, which is the highest quality vegetation, has increased up to 40.27%.
Before you go on, can you just describe what is remnant vegetation? What does that even mean? Use that word.
Through the chair, thanks for your question. Remnant vegetation is forest in close to its original condition. So the forest that would have existed at a site prior to clearing or settlement.
Right, so stuff that hasn't been replanted.
In some cases it has been replanted, but it's reached a quality high enough to achieve a remnant vegetation classification.
Cool.
And that's about 70% of the quality of what would have originally existed.
Okay. Sorry,
and
thank you.
Disturbed remnant, I can continue to
Please do, yeah.
explain. Disturbed remnant is representative of what would have occurred prior to land clearing or disturbance, but isn't at a condition of remnant, so it's slightly more disturbed.
Yep.
So this is the meat on the bones of how we've made an improvement on our native vegetation cover over the years. So this is the city's conservation toolkit, and it lists a range of programs and initiatives that we deliver every day and that have been delivered for 30 or 40 years now that help to improve our native vegetation cover. Some standouts here are our environmental offsets program. So since 2012, that program has $14 million revenue, and that's gone directly into the reconstruction of forests in response to development pressures, and that's contributed 415,000 trees to the city's conservation estate. And we also run our natural areas acquisition program and koala habitat acquisition program. So you'll be hearing more about those programs later. But that program has succeeded in increasing the city's conservation estate by 33% in cover over the last 20 years, which is a significant achievement. And another really important piece of the puzzle is the work we do with private landholders in partnership with them. So a lot of the native vegetation cover that makes up the 51% is growing on private land. So those programs that we deliver with private landholders are a really critical piece of the puzzle. So we have 500 Land for Wildlife members across the city now, and that covers an area close to 5,000 hectares in that program, which is significant. The council's conservation estate is 14,000 hectares. So sitting our 5,000 hectares of forest that's in partnership with private landholders demonstrates the significance of that one. And there's a range of other measures too, which form our BAU. But it's an important point that we're continuing to deliver our conservation toolkit, and it is contributing to an increase in vegetation cover. And it's not as simple for us as delivering improved areas. It's also an effort to maintain our existing cover, and it's important that we continue to work to maintain our cover into the future, and that will involve the continued implementation of programs that you can see on the slide there. And a standout or an example of that improvement is a forthcoming 200-hectare environmental offset project that will be delivered in conjunction with the ARC project, the Advanced Resource Recovery Centre. So that will be delivered in the north of the city and will help to increase our native vegetation cover by 0.16%.
That's 0.16 plus 50.87 pushes us over that 51. I just did some maths. Of course you can, Councillor Gates.
Thank you. Because at Planning Committee this week, there was some land that was basically recommended for movement into the open space area. So have there been any calculations done on what the revegetation of that land might do to improve our situation, that we might just get there?
Through the chair, thank you. I'm not quite sure on the exact parcel you were mentioning.
What was that planning? Sorry. So when we acquire a block of land that already has trees on it, that's already in the calculation. If we either plant some trees or revegetate, undertake a regrowth program.
I don't know how much there was, but there was some future industry land that was becoming open space, things like that. So again, I don't know how much, but that would be an opportunity, wouldn't it, if we planted that to actually increase our vegetation cover.
Yeah, have I said that correctly? So if we plant the trees, we increase the native vegetation cover. If we just acquire land that's got trees on it, that doesn't change it because we include private land in this native vegetation cover.
Through you to Councillor Gates, correct. So the state's mapping, which is the current mapping is from 2021, which is why we only have a 2021 layer at the moment, looks at all the native vegetation cover, whether it's private, public, existing, future. That is what it is. When we what we do in terms of our calculations and understanding a forecast of what our target might look like, say next year or the future year, we do look at proved development applications. We also look at areas that might come in to open space and the conservation estate. It's a bit rubbery because we're still basing our figures on 2021 mapping because that's really the Bible, if you like, of vegetation cover. But yes, large areas like what you've referred to, if we restore those areas and then they are mature trees and they're picked up in the vegetation mapping, will eventually be counted towards that target.
Thank you. But equally, if a development of potentially 6,000 dwellings removed a lot of vegetation, that will be impactful.
That's downward pressure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, just a quick question so you can continue. But with regards to the Christmas 2023 storm, so we're looking at 2021 mapping, how different do we think the reality is from these statistics?
Are you going to go on with that in the presentation?
Through the chair, no, it's not included, but we have some indication that the Christmas storm and as well as Tropical Cyclone Alfred didn't reduce the cover of vegetation, just affected the condition. So there was a lot of canopy loss, but where that canopy loss occurred, it's either responded as it might after a bushfire, or there were large trees that were fallen in the middle of a forest, and that will be relatively quickly replaced. And is still covered.
So when a tree falls in the middle of a forest, it's still native vegetation cover because there's heaps of other trees around it.
Yes. The minimum pixel size for this mapping is 2,000 metres squared. So it doesn't pick up individual trees that are growing in a street, but it picks up the larger.
So we have to pick up almost half an acre. Like a half acre has to be practically cleared for us to impact. Okay. All right. So every time we clear half an acre to build houses, that impacts it. But every time a tree falls down in a storm, it doesn't impact it as much.
Through the chair, that's correct.
So I'm oversimplifying it. I'm sorry. That's probably very disrespectful. But any other questions before we move on? Go ahead.
Well, that's actually the end of my presentation, and very happy for more questions.
Does anyone have any other questions about the native vegetation mapping? Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Just interested in the private landholder partnership you mentioned. We work with them, but I'm just wondering how. So if a private landholder has remnant veg on there, you know, is it an opt-in? Is there an overlay? Is there? How do we do that so we protect that?
Through the chair, thank you for your question. Our conservation partnerships team has 6 officers, 6 conservation partnerships officers who directly engage with landholders through the Land for Wildlife program, and it's a completely voluntary program, but the services we deliver are extensive. If a landholder wishes to jump into their forest and actively restore it, then our team will go with them in the first instances and train them and provide tools and some chemicals to get them started in that effort. And there are also stepping stone programs where they can increase their impact by participating in environmental grants programs. So our Nature Conservation Assistance Program can help with that work. And also if the property is of significant environmental value, they can enter into a voluntary conservation agreement with us that places a nature refuge or a covenant over that land and protects it in perpetuity.
Go ahead, please.
So how important is it for for us to retain parcels of remnant veg on private land?
Through the chair, very important from our point of view, but there are other protection mechanisms, whether those listed in our conservation toolkit. Some of those are through the city plan protection mechanisms that protect our highest quality vegetation. But the older and the higher quality the forest is, the more value it has from an ecosystem perspective.
Last question,
Chair. As many as you like.
The reason I asked that is interesting in the report, page 88, has actually an aerial sort of example where we actually talked about this site in planning committee. There's an industrial site in Old Burleytown, and there's a strip, quite a significant strip of remnant vegetation through there. And it was interesting because Councillor Dora and I did a site visit with the owner who had an intention to level that, so for industrial activity. And hearing you talk about partnerships, I'm just, obviously that's voluntary, but just interested in how that we obviously want to try and protect remnant vegetation, but I'm aware of that future intent to turn that into industrial. So that's probably an example I was looking at. How would we work with a landholder when it's, say, industrial and it's got remnant veg?
So through the chair, there are city plan protection mechanisms for that type of forest in that type of location, and there are also in the event where remnant vegetation can't be protected, there are opportunities to partner on environmental offsets that will, in the longer term, offset the impact of that clearing.
Cool. Any other questions? Do I have a mover? Who likes trees? Councillor Curtis moved it. Councillor Martin seconded it.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course you can.
Just very quickly, so the remnant vegetation increase, I was wondering if we can have, if there's any detail in the association of how much of that remnant vegetation increase is due to our city-led restoration and rehab work?
So is that a question you can take on notice, or can you answer it now?
I can't, through the chair, I can't answer it now, but we can definitely make that calculation for you.
Yep, that'd be very interesting though, Mr. Chair, because I'm guessing a fairly significant chunk of that percentage, which if that percentage could be related to hectares or acres as well, would be good. And I think the correlation to what we spend each year on restoration and rehab work would probably show that the majority of that remnant vegetation increases because of our efforts.
Yeah, so just so we're very clear on what you're asking for, within the report there was a table that talked about the change in remnant vegetation from 2006 to 2021, and you want to know what proportion of that was city-led programs.
Yeah, there's a significant percentage increase.
Yeah.
How much of that could we correlate to our efforts and expenditure of ratepayer funds on restoration and rehab work each year?
Could I extend that? Can we try to do something that comes up to 2025? So separate 2006 to 2021, and then if there's a way we can kind of talk about the programs we run between 2021 and 2025, so we can have a bit of a picture about the way we're headed as well. Is that something we can do, or not really?
We will try. That was a question I've been asking as well.
You've been asking that question,
it's challenging because there's so many variables, and at the end of the day, we still need to rely on the state's mapping. However, we are tracking in the right direction.
Yes. I've got no doubt. But
we will have, my understanding is that we'll have, the Herbarium may release the next 2023 mapping at the end of the year, potentially. Right. So by the end of the year, we might have another opportunity to come back and provide more sort of up-to-date figures.
Okay.
But yes, we can look at doing those calculations as well, Councillor.
Yeah. That would be appreciated.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, there's so many attributes to that target, that figure.
Yep.
Breaking it down can be difficult. It's quite static.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
I've got a mover in Councillor Curtis and a seconder in Councillor Martin. Councillor Curtis, do you want to talk about how much you love trees?
Yeah, sure, why not? I think the city boasts what sounds like a really ambitious target when it comes to native vegetation, but is proving quite obtainable thanks to some very disciplined planning and policy. The map outlines where we're sitting, and it's welcomed information for our situational awareness, and we look forward to you continuing your good work in achieving that ambitious but attainable goal.
Awesome. Does anyone hate trees and want to speak against the motion? No one hates trees. That's great. Are you happy for that to be a close? Great. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Thanks, Andrew and team. And you did great for your first time. Well played.
Thank you.
Thanks, CJ. The next one we have is an unstart item, which was the overview of the Hazard Reduction Burn Program, which I think we're inviting Heidi to come and talk about. Initially, this was a start item, but there were some questions that I had from the broader community about fuel load and such things, so I thought we might just... Is there a short presentation, Heidi? No. Okay, awesome. All right, well... Hang on, I've got Councillor Gates. So you're not a member, so it's okay. Are you leaving for a second? Yeah, okay. We'll just pause. You want to stick around, or do you want to... Okay, so why don't you go and do what you need to do, and we'll have a short 2-minute adjournment. All right, we're coming back from our short adjournment for amenities and such, and we've got Heidi Nicole from the Hazard Reduction Burn Program. There's no presentation, but I had a couple of questions, if that's okay. So my first question actually relates to the notification of residents. Firstly, it looks like we notify just over 4,000, almost 4,500 residents per burn. To what extent do we get feedback that people aren't aware and they wanted to be notified that weren't?
Thanks, Chair. We actually don't get a lot of community feedback on the negative side of we weren't notified that this burn was occurring because we have so many layers of notification within the program. So not only do we have that initial notification letter that goes out at the start of the season, we also put QR codes up around and surrounding the sites. We also establish visual messaging boards when we are doing the burning. We have the Hazard Reduction Burn Program webpage. We do inform sessions throughout the season, which also indicates where they can get that information and what is actually occurring throughout the season. So generally speaking, we don't get a lot of residents coming to us saying, hey, we didn't know that this was going to occur this year. And when we do get a member of the community frustrated about the burns because of smoke or asthma or things like that, what's our process? How do we deal with that? Yep. So again, it's all embedded within that notification process. The sooner that they're aware of it, the more those arrangements can be made. Typically speaking, if there are community members adjacent to a burn site that have either children or members within their family that have particular impacts from smoke, so it could be respiratory issues or whatever. Yep. They get put onto what's known as our register. So we will specifically call them to make sure that when the burn has been confirmed, that they're aware that it is occurring and that can make alternative arrangements, close up their home, move elsewhere for the next couple of days. And so if there are members of the community who are worried about that and maybe they've had an issue before, they can actually phone, who do they phone council or do they phone the DMC or who do they phone? They either go through ourselves, so we do have a direct line that community can contact, or just through general customer service. General customer service can divert it through. And you can be added to that register if you want to be notified if there's a burn in your area. That's correct. That's great. That's good feedback. The other question I had related to fuel load. There was a bit of talk in the community just over the last while with all the rain that we've had. What's our expectation or planning? How has that involved a change in expected fuel load now that there's lots of potentially new growth if we get a sunny winter? Yep. So it is just a part of this environmental process. So we will always go through these seasons where we'll be drier, we'll be wetter, we'll have those vegetation responses. In general, we are overseeing what that fuel loading is like throughout the conservation estate, and with that, we're constantly monitoring the residual risk of that. So that gets incorporated in our residual risk modelling process, and then we start targeting our high-risk locations, and that's when we'll do either hazard reduction burn as a mitigation measure, vegetation management works, or whatever it might be to help to manage those responses. And what steps are we taking? So for instance, in Division 9, where we have lots of conservation estate and there's lots of fire trails, during the really heavy rain over the last little while, there's a lot of fire trails that have kind of been maybe eroded. The fire trail almost sometimes acts as a drainage route as well. That's kind of how it works, and they've been quite impacted. What steps are we taking as a council to try and make sure that those access routes are in good nick and we're able to manage a fire if that risk does occur? So the city undertakes annual condition monitoring and audits of the fire trail network, and especially after these high weather events such as what occurred over TC Alfred. So the rangers, in addition with a number of other officers, go throughout that network to firstly audit them to see what the condition are, and then following that they'll program certain maintenance works to ensure that those in-service trails are always fit for purpose. Okay, and my question is this next one's probably for Alex rather than yourself, Nicole, but we're about to go through this special budget process where we're going to talk about budget, and it occurs to me that that fire train network and some of the work that we're doing in this space may, our business as usual budget allocation for this may not meet the needs that we need to. Are we in the right space with the current and planned budget for this, or is this something that councillors really need to be aware of as we head into special budget committee?
Councillor, I'm not in a position to provide advice on that today. However, any budget requirements for these programs are built into the existing allocation that we have within our budget. So, yeah, is that right? We've got existing budget that I think would cover what's required for this year. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Was there any other questions about the hazard reduction burn program? All right, I'm happy to move the item. The motion is, or should be on the screen, that we're just noting the successful delivery of the previous program, 2024. Actually, before we finish, the planning for this year's hazard reduction program, has that been sent out to councillors yet? It has been. Okay, great. Awesome. So all councillors who have got this program will be aware of the 2025 program and they'll have notification about that.
So we provided advice to all divisional councillors in November last year.
Yeah, okay, cool.
For this year's hazard reduction program.
Yeah, great. Awesome. May I have a seconder? Councillor Wilkinson. We're just noting the successful delivery of the program. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thanks for coming today. The next item on the agenda is a response to a petition. I've had some correspondence from Councillor Young overnight about this, and he's just asked for a change recommendation, which I'm happy to move on his behalf because he couldn't be here today. He's also not on the committee. But did anyone have any questions about this petition? I mean, it's a Division 5 matter, but there's no other questions? If there is any questions, I'll just ask that you bring up the recommendation with the additional 6. And the assurance that I have from Councillor Young in relation to this is that he has been briefed by officers and sees a need to provide divisional funding to help some specific restoration efforts. Actually, I might just like one question about that. This seems like something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, in that it's a public allocation of $20,000 to assist restoration efforts on private land, and that's not something we normally do, but there are programs we have where we work on private land to enhance outcomes across the broader area. Could you tell us about the lawfulness or otherwise of what's being proposed here and examples where we've used it before?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no problems. The report in response to this petition outlines the range of services that we deliver in the Goonabah Valley and that directly target cat's claw creeper infestations.
Yes.
And they range from the Land for Wildlife program and Environmental Grants program, our
Yes.
NCAP program that I mentioned earlier. And there are also some private protected areas in Goonabah Valley. And there's not a lot of city-owned conservation estate land in Goonabah, but the land that the city does own and manage in Goonabah is cat's claw creeper free.
Okay.
So, and we've engaged with the councillor on an extension of those measures that we might be able to work with residents on.
So do you think it's fair to say that this allocation of $20,000 that is for programs and restoration efforts on private land will improve or protect or mitigate risks on our own land? Is that what it's hoped to do?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, awesome. All right, that's great. I will move it then. That's excellent. May I have a seconder? Question. Oh, question, sorry. Councillor Martin, question.
Sorry, Chair. We're just making sure, because I'm trying to think back to our governance meetings, and I think we retired the public funds on private property policy, and I'm just making sure that we're obviously spending fund. Yeah. So I'm just checking the Act right now, just making sure that this is obviously compliant in, I recall there a section of the Act around.
Is that your question?
My question is, are we in accordance with the Act, and can we spend public funds on private property?
Yeah.
That's the first question.
I don't think we could.
Through the Chair, the existing funding that is delivered in Goonabah on private land is through a council-endorsed policy position program, the Nature Conservation Assistance Program. And
NCAP, yeah, I remember
NCAP.
that. Yeah.
And depending on engagement with the councillor and the community, this funding might be able to go towards increasing the capacity of landholders to deliver their own works on private land. There are some NGOs that can facilitate volunteer work.
This is an augmentation, effectively, of the NCAP program for a specific purpose. Is that what I'm saying here?
Through you, not specifically. That information is to come.
But it's under the NCAP related endorsed position that we're enabling this to occur. Yeah, cool. All right, Councillor Gates.
Chairman, I would suggest that the funding needs to be channelled to that NCAP project rather than it simply say on private land. There's nothing to tell us as representatives how those funds would be spent on private land or where they would be spent. But if it was channelled as an allocation to the NCAP project, I could see our way clear to support it, but I couldn't see our way.
I don't have a seconder right now, so let's adjust the wording such that we can give you some confidence and other councillors some confidence. Councillor Doran, you have a question before we move on?
I'm not on the committee, but
please.
If we put, I know they're going to draft this, but as it was just drafted, wouldn't there be an element of the people who own the private land not addressing this issue because they think we're going to pay for it?
The short answer to your question is maybe.
And isn't that a bit of a slippery slope for, say, for example, Salvinia? There's some constrained lakes in my area where they're not public, but the owner of those lakes have to address that weed. And if we say we're going to come in if people don't address it, won't that mean that sometimes people just they'll neglect their responsibilities and expect council to come in?
So there's lots of programs in the Western divisions in particular that relate to funded activities by the ratepayer to mitigate weed impacts. As you might imagine, weeds and other pests don't recognise property boundaries, and so we provide funding like this through the NCAP program and through other programs, not just the NCAP program, regularly. And you're probably right. There are some people who may not meet their obligations to manage pest weeds under whichever act, Biosecurity Act or whichever act it is. But this is effectively a great example of council partnering with private landholders. The NCAP program requires a contribution from that private landholder. It's not like they just get a handout. They have to contribute a proportion of the work themselves through in-kind contribution or labour contribution, or they have to do that through effectively through a finance contribution for materials and such. So it's not like a handout. It's a partnership. But does that describe it poorly enough?
Yes, the successful recipients of NCAP, which is a competitive program,
yes,
are required to provide at least 30% of in-kind contribution to the funds that council supply, and that can be cash or labour.
And the benefit that we've seen, and particularly I've seen it in Division 9, is that weed management on private property has impacted and mitigated the obligation of council to manage that same pest on public land. The weeds just don't care about the property boundary, so helping residents do their job actually lowers the cost of council maintenance on council land adjacent. Councillor Gates, do you have questions, or Councillor Curtis?
No,
you're first if you're...
I'm fine as long... I would not support this because I can think of a million different examples where I would like to allocate divisional funds where council's given planning approvals, for example, with planter boxes on the public side, but they're actually on private property, and I'd love to be able to pay to get them cleaned up because people don't manage them because they'd have to walk a kilometre to get to it to manage it. It's behind the back of their house, which faces a completely different street. So there's lots of examples where local area works could be used for the betterment of garden beds or overgrown weeds or whatever.
So, yeah, I mean, I think entry stations and garden beds are a little bit different to a invasive pest in the hinterland, but I appreciate that.
True, but this has no controls around it whatsoever unless it's linked to the NCAP program, which does require community participation and support. This is just, it can go anywhere. We have absolutely no idea how or where it would be spent.
So, Councillor Gates, we're going to fix that. We're going to fix the wording so you can be satisfied. But I'm going to take a question from Councillor Curtis before we get into that part of it.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question about process first and then a follow-up question. If this was recommended and then resolved at council, would there still be a requirement for that allocation to come back through local area works allocations at a future? You know how we...
I don't think that's what Councillor Young intended when I received the email from him. I think he saw an issue. He saw an issue in his community in relation to Cat's Claw Creeper and thought, okay, I can add $20,000 in local works to try to have a program. And I think I didn't read the email, but I think it's implied in the email that he's written to me that he's expecting some sort of like a community grant application process to happen rather than an arbitrary allocation of funds. But maybe I'll just talk to the officer who spoke to Councillor Young and you can clarify that for me.
Through the chair, the councillor mentioned to me that he would like the funds allocated to a local NGO.
Right, okay.
That would then work with the community to help address the issue.
Right. So is there a legislative mechanism for us to identify that community organisation in this resolution? Do you know who that NGO is intended, or
through you? No, I'm not.
No, don't know yet.
Not sure.
Perhaps, Chair, if I may suggest that we convene just to try and find some better wording that might capture what is the intent here. I think calling out the specific NGO might be difficult in the recommendation because we would need to. No,
but I am aware of lots of NGOs, probably half a dozen NGOs that could potentially undertake this work, and if that NGO or an NGO who is interested in undertaking that work was to make application under a community grant process or an environmental grant process, to me that would be a very straightforward way to make sure it was compliant with any relevant legislation.
Yeah. So
Councillor Curtis still has the floor.
Yeah, apologies.
But did you want to...
I think what I was getting at is if it's below the threshold of needing to come to us for a resolution, I'm not sure why it needs to be captured at all, and that could be just a personal choice of the local councillor to do that without it being a resolution of the entire council. I guess that's the question I'm getting at. I'm wondering why it's being called out when he could make that allocation himself through the processes afforded to him, or he couldn't.
I don't think he could necessarily. I think he might. He's probably just at the threshold where he would need to have a council resolution to allocate the funds for this purpose. But the fact that he is allocating them, in his mind, he's talking about a particular NGO managing the program. This, for instance, in Division 9, Somerset College, in partnership with Watergum, applied for funding through the community grants process to undertake a waterway and weed management program at Wyangan Creek, and I have provided funding for that through that grant program. It's an environmental project, it's on private land, but it profoundly impacts the council assets nearby that the water flows through and from. So I can see there being community benefit, and that's where an individual NGO made a normal application to get that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's an example of what I think Councillor Young is intending.
I'll just make it more direct, Chair. So is there an explicit requirement for council to resolve the approval of Councillor Young's allocation of funding for this purpose?
That'd be a question. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that, and I'd have to go back and consult to... perhaps we can do that by the end of this meeting.
Yep. So this is a bit flaky in terms of the explanation. There's no mention of an NGO. It's just, can we give $20,000 for community restoration on private land?
Yeah, so again, if we were to change this word, Councillor Gates, they're the words of this to say, be allocated from Division 5 in 25-26 to an augmentation of the NCAP program, or we could, if it's going to be that and then that community organisation could apply under the provisions of that NCAP program for this purpose. I'm not sure if that could be done. Is that a no or yes? This is a question to the officer. Could that be done? Would that satisfy what was intended?
Sorry, Councillor, can you repeat the question?
So is the NCAP program a suitable vehicle in order to achieve what Councillor Young requested be done?
Through you, Chair, the NCAP program is obviously an expression of interest program.
Yes.
So it's open to all parties, all residents to apply for that funding.
Yes.
The actual mechanisms of the application of the program is well suited because there's a transparent process, then there's reporting, there's the in-kind contribution. But in terms of actually the application of people applying for that program, I'm just unsure of the mechanism of this allocation to be attributed to that NCAP.
All right. So, yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Sorry, Councillor Martin, did you have a question? Yeah. Let's ask a question before we have a break.
Thanks, Chair. My question while you're working this up too was just about our policies, and I thought local area works had to be channeled through GAF in terms of when we consider local area works. So I wonder if whether this is referred to GAF or referred to council, but my understanding.
I don't believe that the committee matters, particularly since it's an addendum to a response to a petition which is meant to come through this committee. So what I do think is that I think we probably need some advice briefly about how to word this properly. And is it advice that we can get in a short period of time, or do we need more time? Because it might be better for Councillor Young to deal with this at full council, and that gives you a week to kind of play with it. Yeah. I think you might need more time.
Yes, thank you. That would be my preference also, because I think we're looking at not just the conservation programs, but the city's policies on a whole. So I need a bit of time to work that out.
Let's do that. So let's just go back to the officer's recommendation, and I'll move that, and I'll liaise with Councillor Young to potentially amend the motion when we get to full council. Is there anyone who would like to second that with me in relation to the petition response? Oh, thank you. Councillor Wilkinson, almost it lapsed. Goodness gracious. Councillor Wilkinson seconded that. I'll move the item. Councillor Wilkinson will second it. I don't think any more needs to be said. The petition kind of speaks for itself, but at full council, Councillor Young will have an opportunity to appropriately word an additional 6 to achieve his specific goals. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thanks, team. Sorry about that. That was more complicated than I thought it was going to be. The final item is actually a confidential item, which is about acquiring natural areas. And given that the report identifies specific properties and has commercial implications when it comes to that, we do need to move into close. It relates to both the local government's budget and negotiations relating to a commercial matter, which is about acquisition of land. I'm happy to move to close. Councillor Castro is happy to second that. All those in favour? We've moved into close. Welcome back, everyone who is watching. We've just had a conversation in closed session identifying some properties as part of the acquisition of natural areas program that we have that is funded by a levy on everyone's rates notice. And we've talked at length about different locations and in the program and had a presentation. Would anyone like to move the officer's recommendation? No one. That's a shame. Councillor Marshall is very happy to continue to acquire koala habitat. He's the only one who likes koalas, obviously. Councillor Wilkinson also likes koalas. He's going to second the motion. Councillor Marshall, do you want to say a few words? You don't want to. Councillor Wilkinson, in the absence of Councillor Marshall having the courage to open debate, would you like to? I'm just saying. Did you want to talk about our acquisition of natural areas?
I'll keep it very brief, given that we've been in close. Look, I think that the city's on a great trajectory towards our acquisition program that we're running. I think we've got some really good environmental outcomes that we're achieving for the city through this program, and I look forward to hopefully seeing this continued well into the future if it's the will of the council. So thank you to all the city officers for your time involved, and appreciate your presentation today as well.
It's good. Anyone else want to speak against it? So just for the public's interest, we've added a number of properties to this acquisition list. We've talked about the purpose of the land being acquired and the relevant act that relates to, and we've also authorising or proposing to authorise that the CEO or the delegate of the CEO can enter into and settle contracts to purchase land for conservation purposes and koala habitat purposes. And it's a really impressive and awesome program that's helped us come up with a really good way to just both conserve the environment but also find great habitat for koalas. Anyone, any other comments? All right, all those in favour? Motion is carried. Is there any general business today? All right, I want to close the meeting at 11:39. Thanks, guys.